Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for being here. First of all, on behalf of the Mexican government, I should like to thank the organizers for the opportunity of holding this meeting on passive structures in the deployment of telecommunications. I want to thank all for accepting the invitation to participate in this panel. Thank you. Mention has been made here about the different challenges faced by the government and industry to cope with the needs of customers of telecommunication services, especially for the development of 5G that will come in the coming years, quite strong and with a lot of demands. One of those challenges has to do with the use of the passive infrastructure and its division. More and more other companies sharing the network with the purpose of reducing costs, maintain their margins at the same time to cope with the demands of consumers. On the other hand, it gains relevance, while the use of state assets become important. Different governments are carrying out, some have already done it, different projects to facilitate the use of posters, the right of ways, roads, furniture to be used by the industry to improve the conditions of the infrastructure for telecommunication services. It is precisely in this type of experience on which the discussion of this panel will concentrate on. I want to remind you that we continue to use the code is CLT18 so that all of you may make your questions online, and I may share them with the members of the panel. In the first place, I should like to ask Verena Weber, she is an analyst of policies on digital economy of OCRE, that will to share with us which are some of the successful experiences they have observed in the world regarding the use and division of the passive infrastructure.
Thank you. Is this working? Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me start off by a couple of examples. What do we see when it comes to passive infrastructure sharing? So we see that over the past years, different models have been used. So, for instance, we see tower companies that are providing services to traditional telecommunication operators, and they provide actually a whole range of different services. And and these are not only used, by the traditional operators, but it also makes it easier for new entrants to enter the market, because obviously these decrease the costs. Then we have the classical case where we have operators that are sharing their passive infrastructure. They have been doing this for quite a long time already. We see it across the entire OECD area, so that's a pretty common thing. I mean, it's not published so much, but that's happening. Then we see that different OECD countries are deploying municipal networks. So we have many of those actually in Sweden. We have a couple of those in Germany, for instance. And so what you see there is that you have the municipalities deploying, for instance, a fiber network, and then, others can access it. So this is sometimes, this goes a bit beyond just a pure passive infrastructure sharing. And then finally, we see cases of functional and structural separation across the OECD.
Muchas gracias, Marina, por estos ejemplos.
Thank you, Marina, for these examples. I would like to make a question to Elena Sparacmucci. She is head of communication from Colin International. Which are the experiences that you have observed using the passive structure for the deployment of telecommunications? I agree with the overview submitted by Verena. I think that to contribute my European experience, there are two important aspects. To use the public infrastructure, because private, as Verena says, is a common model and very much used in all European countries. But there is something very important. On the one hand, and European executives from 2015 to reduce costs of the broadband deployment, and this is important because Doblado has the division of the public enterprises, not in electricity, water, gas companies. Possibility to move to telecommunication network and have access to places of this telecommunication enterprises. So this directive is linking, and it is very interesting to see how in each country, in practice, there is an implementation with a greater visibility and availability of other structures by public companies. On the other hand, there are also systems and resolutions of conflicts. For instance, interesting is a report of BEREC that has reported that there are over 100 disputes that were turned in between telecommunication operators, public utilities. It's a model that is being implemented gradually, and we accompany all the main projects in each country. It's curious, for instance, in Poland, there are 80% of disputes are because it's a symmetric use among that of the telecommunication companies among themselves. The second relevant issue in the digital agenda policy is that as an objective to the year 2025 to deploy an obligation to have coverage of 5G, especially on network and transportation. That too is an important topic because it presupposes a continuity of this development of network. We're talking about avenues, highways, railroads, and all the communication lines that are national and intra-European. So it is a very relevant subject. It is part of a public policy. Other matters, there are national interesting cases. For instance, in Austria, there is a proposal of a strategy for 5G, where in practice there is a possibility to have access to the text of buildings, public buildings, federal public buildings. This is a proposal similar to what Mexico offered 2 or 3 years ago. In several cases, we have a lot of benchmark on this topic and all the models that are being used in each country to use the infrastructure, power, water, infrastructure to pass telecommunication network. Those topics are, in the past years, this topic has become very important. Very good. Thank you. Now, the government of Mexico is about to launch new projects to use the electrical national infrastructure to deploy telecommunication network. And on the other hand, the rights of roads, highways, etc. Later on, I'd like to elaborate more on those experiences that you have mentioned. Now, I'd like to ask Sebastián Cabello, you know him well, Regional Director for Latin America of GSMA. On the side of the industry, how can the operators empower those efforts that their governments are making to better use the passive infrastructure in the takeoff telecommunication structures? Thank you for the invitation. For us, we're following closely what is happening in Mexico. At the same time, we pay great attention both in Peru and Brazil when different antennas have entered. We are hopeful that perhaps Mexico, Argentina may find a way to this topic of constitutional autonomy of the municipalities that are the ones who establish the right to waste. So the federal government sometimes are tied down. They have a national agenda, and they have to request spectrum. They have connectivity and so forth. And then when you ask for a permission locally, they find bureaucracy rules, and they find very little clarity to take off with antennas. We saw it in the case of Brazil when for the World Cup it was requested 2.5 to produce LT. It was not 700 yet. The government did it, but when asking for permission, the operators could not obtain it. The mayors that had the different sides of the world game. We are about, they say you want to be a world venue. Well, okay, if not, if you don't authorize antenna, you will not have it, and everybody wanted to connect themselves at the stadium. And it's a place of a lot sharing. The airport is the same, whether it be a jumbo and so forth. They all hook on their phones all of a sudden, and then you have to provide connectivity. And what the operators think, they think they have a good amount of antennas and so forth. Well, if I invest it, well, others have to get into my line. We know that competition is something good. The competence is good. But this is a very thin muscle the government must provide, working with incentives to the mayors to favor the infrastructure and to have common rules. In Argentina and other countries, we tried a framework authorization, but what happened was that the mayors, some could not follow it and others don't. This was voluntary. Others tried to make a ranking of the most amicable municipalities. Colombia did that. So all these are friendly things on the part of the government. It's difficult. The operator has a complex situation. We think that we must work on the basis of incentives, because those who share infrastructure should have much less municipal rates or taxes, and if they share it between two, well, it should be less, and if it is 60% less of the tax they have to pay for. Then the situation of public buildings, as you're doing, federal buildings, what they need there is to work with the administration of state property that has different names in different countries, so that management would be automatic, although it isn't yet. It has problems in different places. We know that Mexico has different models, but this is not felt automatically. In Argentina, it's the same. The administration says, okay, you're going to use the building, I'm going to put the network, I want to put it. So the agency promoting this, the Secretariat and the different regulating institutions of the sector may impose over others with overlap. It's a sort of overlapping. So a political skill is required to establish a one-stop shop. Incentives, one-stop shop, and even for those who are leaders and have more antennas, to obtain some sort of benefit to share it and not to command them, not by force, because this works only through commercial agreements. If this is compulsory or mandatory, it would not take place. But first, we have to try the carrot and then the stick. Thank you.
Actually, most of the arrangements in an American country makes it difficult to have collaborations between government bodies. Sometimes you can do something at the federal level, but then when you go to the other levels, at the state level and the municipal level, it becomes more difficult. I think Peña will be talking about what has happened in Mexico to see if we can get municipalities on board regarding the use of their buildings. Now I would like to make a question to Mauricio Agudelo. What regulatory obstacles are you seeing in Latin America for sharing and the assets, government assets, for deploying these communication networks? Thank you, Ezequiel, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel, which is the last session of the fourth day of the Latin American Telecommunication Congress that started with deploying broadband in rural areas. I would like to divide my remarks on in three parts. First, we have the sharing models. We have been talking about the tower model, but we cannot ignore that there is an important opportunity to share optic fiber deployments with other physical infrastructures. There are 5 models that we have identified and that have an important synergy in terms of saving cost. We have, for example, joint deployments between the electrical system and the highway systems. The case of CF in Mexico, the case of the integration system in Central America with the guard cables. But there are other models that are quite interesting, particularly for mass transportation. We are talking about the subways, we're talking about buses, where that same canalization that we are building in the cities can be used. In the case of Mexico, this is very interesting. It could be also the case of Quito in Ecuador, where these conducts for optic fibers or for gas or whatever, this will enable the different administration to provide service and provide connectivity to the different ministries, health, education, economy, and this will lead to better planning of the cities. Then we have the case of railways, where we can see important opportunities. What is happening in Spain, for example, what they are doing with the railway networks. They are using optic fiber, and if I remember well, the sale was around $400 million. In the case of highways, the most relevant case is the Aberti case in Spain. In cities like Madrid, Barcelona, they also have the supply of metropolitan fiber services. Maybe we have not thought much about hydroways, like if we see the rivers in Latin America, we can have submarine cables and we can share optic fibers. So On the one hand, there is a new offer of digital service. Let's think, for example, about the logistic problems. We talked about that in the previous panels. And many ports are not digitalized, and many boats have to wait 4 or 3 days. So if we have a good sign in the highways and in the ports, that will be good. And when you include all these services, the savings and synergies implies savings of from 18% in sharing the civil work, canalization, communication, the fiber of dark fiber. When you include outsourcing, or there was a study that we carried out 1 year ago that shows all this. The second topic has to do with the tower models. There are 2 models in the region, the build-to-suit, from where there are companies with a lot of expertise developing or building capacities to negotiate licenses, environmental rights, etc. And here, operators can save cost without the need of dealing with these problems. And then we have the big companies, American Towers, etc. These models have been developed in Colombia and Brazil, where basically the idea is to penetrate with broadband services to cities. Then we have the issue of barriers. Recently, we concluded a study where we analyzed several types of barriers. There is an increasing, or the traffic is increasing dramatically, so we need to deploy antennas, and we have talked about legal barriers, administrative barriers. There are some interesting practices also. There has been the one-shop window that has been mentioned here, where you can get services like water, power, gas, etc. You can have one or a single license and cover all those services. Then we have the infrastructure maps that are linked to long-term and mid-term urban planning. What I mean is, if there is an operator distributing energy in the city and they are going to work on the streets, they need to know that there is a public or private company that is going to install this infrastructure. Thank you, Mauricio. I remind you that the platform is open. The code is CLT18. You can upload your questions, and now I'll give the floor to Mrs. Peña. Elizabeth, I would like to ask you what do governments have to do to take advantage of the infrastructure in the deployment of telecommunication networks? Well, thank you, Ezequiel. I want to thank the department, because it's the second time they invite me to participate in the workshop. The role of governments is fundamental for companies to access infrastructures. Why is it fundamental? Well, we need the state to become a facilitator. We need the government to become a facilitator. Why? because sometimes, as you well said, we need to deal with different levels of government. Sometimes in the municipalities, they don't know why it is important to have an infrastructure, why it is important to facilitate companies to deploy those infrastructures. So we also need political will. Sometimes you come as a company or as an investment promoter and you have to explain that connectivity is needed, that this broadband service is needed. And it is very complicated for them to understand. In the morning I heard the Colombian experience. Colombia has been developing its municipalities and states and convincing them about the importance of developing infrastructure. We also have the case of Argentina, and we can mention many other countries in Latin America. For Mexico, the fact that we have a telecommunication reform has been essential. This has given us the opportunity to change the legislative system. This reform was included in the Constitution. So this means that we were able to make many changes. And the reform makes network sharing mandatory. This is a wholesale network, and they can develop infrastructures they can share and provide capacity for many operators. And with this, we can save costs, because developing infrastructure also means investment and cost. And sometimes companies don't have money for that. So with this project of the Mexican government, the companies can use the shared network and save costs. They don't need so much investment. And with this, we can bring down infrastructure barriers, competition barriers, because there could be a fairer competition. This is a 20-year period project that will not only generate connectivity. It is a new project that is not very much seen in many countries, and it uses the 700 band, a band with a lot of capacity, with advanced technologies. This will allow us to migrate to 5G. So the goal is to develop connectivity, but this means political will, reaching the whole population. Another important project in Mexico is the real estate project. We have included those working in real estate. If you don't include them, it's very difficult, because they manage all the buildings. So we need the real estate, we need the federal government, and we need the investment promoter body, so that we convince everybody that we need connectivity, that we need to reduce this digital divide. We are living very interesting times. We talk about technologies, artificial intelligence, connected cities. We are talking about 4.0 industries, but how are we going to reach 4.0 industries if there is no connectivity, if there is no infrastructure, if the governments don't work for connecting their population? If this doesn't happen, all technological development will have no effect and no impact. We need to have access all these technologies through smartphones, we need to reduce digital divide with infrastructure, otherwise we will have no access. It is also said that we require 10 times more than the existing infrastructure to support the future needs. So it is very important for governments to think how they are going to generate those incentives, how they are going to do away with these barriers and act. This is a will that is not only a will on part of the government, but also on part of the companies and on part of the population. Citizens' involvement is very important. They need to understand they need connectivity.
Muchas gracias, Elizabeth. El año pasado,
Thank you very much. Last year was the organized study on the implementation of the telecommunications reform in Mexico. That study mentions different difficulties and obstacles faced by the operators and the establishment of their telecommunications networks. Can you tell us a little bit, not just about the Mexican case, but about other Latin American countries and other countries in the world? I think it is useful for all of us to learn from the experience of other countries. What obstacles are there and what are the ways to face them and somehow deal with them?
Thank you, and maybe let me start with Mexico. So we were quite intrigued by the initiative you're having within NABIN, to make public buildings available. We thought this is a very innovative approach. And, when we presented it to our member countries, we said it's a sort of an Airbnb for telco operators. And what it did is was just one, increasing, transparency. Basically, you could go to a website and you would know, okay, if I want to build out infrastructure in this or that area, okay, these are the buildings I see and I may be able to use. And the other thing we liked is, that the prices were set at a very low level. To actually achieve the broader goal, which is what Elizabeth just mentioned, like improving connectivity in the country. Now, the challenges we see that operators face, and this is across the OECD, is often when it comes to rights of way. And this is on several levels of the government, so you have federal responsibilities, you have responsibilities by regions, by municipalities. So what we see there, there's some coordination challenge, I would say, and this is probably one of the most important challenges that we see, I would say.
Okay.
Thank you, Elena. Sebastian, please.
Mencionabas hace un momento
You mentioned
la forma de cómo lidiar con estas barreras.
How to deal with these barriers in the municipalities and the different institutions that exist in Latin American governments. Incentives to mayors, rankings. We commented with some of you in the meetings that we have held as part of this conference that Mexico may be studying the ways to do away with this digital fiscal issue of municipalities and not charging anything of that. So it could be an entry way for operators, a fixed, transparent rate, so that other forms of access could be banned. And if you could please speak a little bit more about other countries in the SMA which have found other successful ways to find coordination, companies, federal governments and local governments. If I had this, I would say this is a model to be followed. The truth is that no single case can be replicable fully. I would like Mexico to be one. This is why we follow the trend to try to find the legal ways to prevent any arbitrary use. Peru, according to his project in the Congress, imposed limits on the denial, on negation. If anyone requested to place an antenna, the municipality had a permit to issue that permit, but if not, that would be issued automatically. So it is a way to do it. But once it went to the Congress, I don't know if it actually works or if it provided any benefits. It's still a big challenge to have more antennas, and everybody's basically talking about that matter. Argentina, with the different guidelines, established models, but the municipalities needed to subscribe it. And I am happy about Verena's idea. So this, the B&B of sites, it's not just sites that all sites should be connected by fiber. That's the other challenge. Not just having the challenge cannot be connected by a beam that comes from the sky. There must be fiber, and fiber is going to be fundamental for everything. Countries desire to have fiber. Uruguay has made a lot of progress. 80% of the population lives in 80 kilometers radio in the capital city. But for the rest, it's going to be very difficult. So wireless technology requires fiber to provide the services. So we have to find ways. There is not a one size fits all. So what happens in the U.S., where you can set up an antenna easily, is a different concept. Neighbors can do something about it, but commonly it's not the case. So it's a different context. I don't know if Mauricio or anyone in the audience would like to mention a country where things are working properly. We also have the friends from Peru and others. In Brazil, there is also an antennas law. When it goes to the Congress, it goes to the legislators that respond to the local interests, and everything starts to change. What we have found is a set of best practices, better practices that can be somehow conveyed to the other scenarios. And since we have been invited to Argentina to develop the next version of CLT, we have found that in the city of Mendoza, the request to work in the public area takes about 24 to 48 hours. It's an incredibly agile system imposed by the municipality to resolve the matters of the rights and licenses. Commonly, the form that must be filled in for this proceeding is online, accessible, and in the web of the town hall, but to present it, you need to do it in person to the General Board of Directors. The other thing is the municipality of Ejido in Peru, or the request of authorization applies in the positive administrative silence. In Curitiba, Brazil, in 2014, a decree law was published to simplify the proceedings for any telephone-related installation. And in Peru, this famous infrastructure map, which has to do with the telecom structures and the district-related services, and the services that somehow facilitate things. So you can use given tactics which could be socialized, have a coordination with the mayors and so that we can somehow involve these administrations with its practices. One of these constants with its practices is the transparency mechanism and certainty mechanisms. In the case of Mexico, I wanted to share with you that recently the Secretariat of Transport made public an online proceeding for the permits to National Aviation Division 4 structures before this procedure became available online. So it could take maybe a year to actually get a response. Now that it's been fully established, there is a one-stop shop It is an online proceeding, and consequently it can be more expedite. So you can know what you have to do, what you can expect. The same applies for the SCT. Is about to launch with the Energy Regulatory Commission the rules for use of 11 million poles covering a large portion of the national territory. These poles are used, yes, by telecom operators, but are used with not a clear procedure. All the authorization must be obtained from different spots in the country according to the regional competence of the relevant power authority. So the intention is to have a set of regulations, electronic proceeding, in order to prevent uncertainty. That is what actually hinders the ability to make things work better. I wanted to take advantage of this comment to give the floor to Elena so that she can talk to us about the experience in other countries. Guyana knows a little bit more about this.
La compartición de postes un tema
the polls is a relevant topic, especially in countries, big countries. And in Europe, we don't have too many examples anymore. There are countries like the UK, where British Telecom makes it mandatory to share and give access to the polls on the rules of competence due to the significant market share. But there is not a great use of polls in European countries because there are geographic reasons and a different use of the networks and the deployment of the same. Just opposite, there are countries where the use of polls is very important. In the US, for example, there is a great tradition of the use of polls for communications among the states. And there has always been a troublesome case, and it's due to the conflicts between the authorities of the different states of the Union for use on the prices related to the power companies, power utilities. We can say that since the year 2011, the Federal Communication Commission started to reverse these rules and review them, and has imposed a harmonization of the costs for the use of polls. In 2015, they have used a policy to have a more shared use of those polls. And now there are no proposals for the shared use. So the U.S. experience is very interesting. In Latin America, there are different aspects. One, that in the case of Mexico and the case of Brazil, in Brazil, they are trying to rearrange the use of 70,000 poles across the Brazilian territory. It's a complex work because it also involves local states, townships, and the need to rearrange this use, since at times you don't know who is using what. There are conflicts among the operators, So it is a very complicated issue. But at the same time, there is a need in this rearrangement of using better these poles, but also enter these clusters is not into the cities. So there is a need to reuse their poles in municipalities and outside of them. Inside the municipality, the need is to actually put this network underground because these poles are used too much. And the same was faced in Ecuador. It was resolved very well. But in Peru now there is a new obligation and a new disposition by the ministry to actually put the new networks in the underground. There are two approaches. One, to have access to the poles. What are the prices? What are the competition rules? What are the technical rules inside cities and outside the cities? Inside the cities, obviously, there is not a problem. That is, has to do with putting these networks underground and care for the urban aspects. Because the presence of these poles is at times disrupted. Thank you. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you, Elena. Elizabeth, yesterday at the Mexico Hotel, you talked about a study carried out by Promptel on investment opportunities in the Mexican market. In this regard, I would like to ask you to share the economic impact of these public policies for the telecommunication sector. Well, the impact is quite high when you have agencies like this that promote investment, that go out and sell. Because if you want to develop services, you have to invest, you have to bring people. This study was carried out because last year we saw that Mexico's vision was that it was already occupied by the preponderant agent. And this is a mistaken vision because there are still many opportunities where to invest. So we decided to make this study and analyze several markets. There are 7 market niches in telecommunication with 58,000 pesos. So there are opportunities for investment, for developing new business models. Mexico has made a lot of progress in terms of public policies. We had projects like Promptel. Promptel has 3 main purposes. One, to reduce the digital divide. We must guarantee that the population has access to those services. And to guarantee this, we have to supervise the shared network. And we also have to promote investment for the deployment of infrastructures. And not only that, we talk with states so that they adhere to these agreements and use all the federal buildings so that companies may invest. So public policies are fundamental for the development of telecommunications in any country. The international experience states that any public policy to become successful, it will take 12 years. 12 years of implementation of a public policy to be successful. We cannot invent them overnight. We need to follow up. We need a time for maturity. So if we have a public policy like the telecommunication reform that started in 2012, We need that policy to mature, that it will yield fruits. We need these public policies to be followed, and they should also be supported and supervised. National digital strategies, as we listened this morning, cannot be developed overnight. We need a lot of participation by the private sector, the academia, the state, and the social sector. With all these actors, we can have a successful public policy. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, I've been told that we have to change the room for the next panel, so I think we have to conclude. I would like to ask members of the panel to give us, or if there is any final message you'd like to share with us, and we will start with...
So maybe looking a bit into the future, so what we think at the OECD is that infrastructure sharing will become even more important with the deployment of 5G. So actually we see already quite some movement there. So first of all, 5G will require a very high number of small cells. Then there are simple questions like, okay, if you have a street light, how many cells can you fit on the street light? You know, so maybe you're forced to share because there's simply not enough space. So this is a question we're having and we're looking into. And then there are also some strategic considerations for both operators and the public sector. So for operators giving the cost, it makes even more sense to share the infrastructure. And we see some cases, so for instance in Korea, traditionally we always saw end-to-end competition between the big operators. So and there's a huge shift in policy for the moment going on, because for the first time the government said, you know, to these big operators, guys, for the deployment of 5G, it's okay if you share. So this is a shift, and this is why we think that, well, the topic of this panel will even increase in importance for the deployment of 5G.
Sin duda es muy importante el tema.
Undoubtedly, sharing is very important to deploy 5G, as you well said, and that governments must focus on promoting these types of policies for deployment. We will need a lot of antennas. We will need easy mechanisms for deploying all these antennas. We have been talking about the poles here, which undoubtedly is essential, because some antennas will be very small and we will need poles for that purposes. And of course the highway network, the water network, all that, it will be very important. I would like to follow on the same line as Verena. The way in which operators operate today will disintegrate vertically. We see that the relationship with the client is where we will see different players, different actors. Some will have networks, others not. Some will be providing different layer services, like, for example, connected cars, hospitals, education services, security cameras, face recognition, the Internet of the Things. All these will be providers that will need capacities that others have. The wholesale network models will also become increasingly interesting and important. We have seen the case. And in the case of Mexico, it is mandatory. But maybe we don't need to have it, or it doesn't have to be mandatory. It will make sense that Torrera, for example, acquires a spectrum and have a wholesale network. There are many that will have the capacity, but they will not be able to reach the end user, so they will have to share. Such is the case of the wholesale network in Mexico. All that will have to work following the commercial needs and the needs of the different players. The wholesale networks will be interesting, useful, but freedom, commercial freedom will be fundamental so that everybody works as they consider it more comfortable. In almost all poles, light poles and traffic lights, there will have to be an antenna. We are going to operate in millimetric bands. There has been a study on the use of millimetric bands, and Verena also showed how much they will consume. It will consume 2 gigas per hour. So the traffic will be huge and enormous. We will need a millimetric band antenna. So that is why I say that we have to think in a new deployment paradigm at the local level. The municipality has to think about this as an opportunity. The model being used by Antel in Uruguay should also be highlighted. This has advantages when Antel offers each mayor cameras, for example, security cameras. We would have to think about a trade-off model, because this will facilitate the development of the municipality. We know that the mayors are sinister characters everywhere, so we will have to invite them here to our congresses. But that is another topic. We will need different models. Otherwise, nobody will have 5Gs. 5Gs with less antennas will be like having 4G with asteroids, but nothing else. And if we don't have connectivity, this will not work. Thank you, Sebastian. I think one of the panels of this Congress talked about the fact that in a few years' time, most of the data traffic will be from machine to machine and not from person to person. That is why it is important to have sharing networks, wholesale networks, like is the case of the shared network that has overcome the expectations, and it is generating and will generate a new gap or divide in the future. We believe this can be an example of a different way of doing things. It has fulfilled its first coverage landmark. It has almost 36% of population coverage, and it is negotiating and signing contracts to begin providing services through retail operators for the Mexican population. And it is this type of networks what will allow us to share costs and accelerate deployment and address the high demand in terms of data. Elena, I would like you to give us your final message. Well, my final message are the two main trends that are at the heart of the debate. On the one hand, we have the conversion or co-investment, between private companies and between public and private sectors. We have both options, and they are both important, and they need detailed analysis by experts. And the other main message is about sharing of infrastructure sharing. and sharing also other resources like the spectrum. Sharing a spectrum is a very, very relevant topic, and it will be discussed in the coming years. And to have co-investments and sharing, we need to have an adequate regulatory framework from the technical point of view. For sharing spectrum, this is fundamental. And we also need frameworks for competition, financial incentives for the companies, for the private sector. So we need rules and we need arbitration. So we need the independent implementing agencies or complying agencies or entities. Thank you, Elena. Undoubtedly, co-investment is very important. In the case of Mexico, we have a project for developing submarine cables that will link Baja California Peninsula with the land's end of our territory. This is a project that is being done through the association of two companies, or the partnership of two companies. So sharing cost is important because this infrastructure will not be used only by these two partners. It will be used by other operators in the market. And the importance also of the private-public alliance for the development of different projects, the case of sharing shared network. In the case of Mexico, we have the main network for data transfer that is being developed through this scheme where Telecom will be launching the bidding, the basis for bidding. Mauricio, would you like to share a message with us? No, Ezequiel, I just want to mention and emphasize the challenge that the development of the last mile ultra-speed networks represent. In Latin America, 3% of broadband connections are based on optic fiber, and there is a great potential to use the sharing schemes. There is something that has not been mentioned, it's used in other regions, that is sharing canalization costs among operators. It could be telecommunication operators or not. This is a scheme that they work or they deploy wholesale networks, and then there is an offer similar to sharing networks. But what they do is that they share costs, and there is competition in the last mile. And for us, in CAF, we see that this, we believe. So if we make use of other infrastructures like water, electricity, for telecommunication operators, we can have important synergies. Now I will ask Elizabeth Peña if she has any last message. Thank you once again for inviting us. To conclude, I would like to highlight that it is necessary to have the collaboration at the three governmental levels, federal, state, and municipal levels. If we do not collaborate, if there is no ongoing collaboration to promote broadband services, we will not succeed. We need collaboration at the three levels, an effective collaboration. The message is that the population requires or needs access. So municipalities must facilitate access of companies to sites, because it has become a big problem, not only in Mexico, but in several Latin American countries, where the municipalities and all this legal issue has become a barrier to access. So we need to work at the three governmental levels. The other thing is that we need investment promotion agencies. If countries want to grow, we need these type of agencies that will promote our countries so that companies come to invest. Another thing I want to highlight is the creation of a wholesale networks. In the OECD study, it was highlighted that this should be a priority because spectrum is very scarce. If we don't make the best use of the spectrum, it will be very difficult to achieve the connectivity that will be required in few years' times. That is why these types of networks are so important, so that we can generate competition, reduce prices. Another aspect I would like to highlight is infrastructure. If we don't generate this infrastructure for future demands, we need collaboration agreements with the municipalities and with the states. They are essential. The private sector, the government, everybody has to work together in this project. That is essential. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, I thank you all for being here, for being part of this panel. Once again, I thank all the members of our panel for your participation, for being here, and we will see you all next year. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Si nos podemos reunir para la foto oficial.